Hi, I'm David Barr Kirtley, author of the book Save Me Please and Other Stories, and welcome to episode 602 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show we'll be discussing 9 short stories from the book The Best of Larry Niven. And those stories are Inconstant Moon, Rammer, Cloak of Anarchy, The Fourth Profession, Flash Crowd, The Defenseless Dead, Flight of the Horse, The Whole Man, and Night on Mispec Moor. And this will include spoilers for all of those stories, so just be aware of that. And this is a follow-up to our previous discussion of The Best of Larry Niven back in episode 590, so definitely check that out if you missed it. And I'm joined today by my good friend Mercurio D. Rivera, making his 7th appearance on the show. He's the author of the short story collection Across the Event Horizon from Newcon Press. And his story Beyond the Tattered Veil of Stars recently appeared as a podcast from Dust Studios, featuring the voices of Jillian Jacobs from Community and Justin Kirk from Weeds. His first novel, Worgen, The Alien Love War, has been nominated for the Arthur C. Clarke Award. And now here's our interview with Mercurio D. Rivera. All right, so we're here with Mercurio D. Rivera. Welcome to the show.
Hey, David. Happy to be back.
Okay, and so the first story we're going to talk about for part 2 is called Inconstant Moon. And so in this story, there's a young freelance science journalist living in Los Angeles, and he happens to look out the window one night and see that the moon has suddenly become much, much brighter. And he figures out that, moonlight is reflected sunlight, so the sun must have become much, much brighter. So he realizes that the sun has gone supernova, and everyone on the far side, on the daylight side of the Earth, is dead. And as soon as the Earth rotates around to daylight, everyone on his side of the Earth will be dead as well. So he calls up his girlfriend, and they go out on the town to enjoy their last night on Earth. So, David, what'd you think of Inconstant Moon?
I found it so powerful and affecting. And I think it's somewhat ironic that a hard science fiction writer like Larry Niven, that perhaps one of his best stories happens to be a love story. It's so relatable, and it asks a question that probably all of us have thought about, which is, what would you do if you knew you were going to die the next day? How would you spend your final moments? So it's a question we can all relate to or think about it. We've all thought about it, I think. And in this case, our protagonist Stan reaches out to someone he loves and spends the final night in the town with her. They go out first they make love, then they go out for hot fudge sundaes, they go to a piano bar, they go window shopping, and then they go to a liquor store to get some booze and some final goods to take back to the apartment with them. They live in Los Angeles in a high-rise apartment building. And what I found so poignant about it is the fact that to some extent, there's like a willful blindness going on where they're not talking about what's happening and they're just enjoying the moment, living in the moment. And what I also like, he doesn't discuss it with Leslie for the first part of the story. And then the reader comes to realize that she knows what's going on as well. She's also being willfully blind to the situation, but she knows that the end is near. So,
well, he's like trying to keep it from her at first, just saying, let's just whimsically, let's go out and have a night, but then at some point she figures it out. And so then.
Yeah, that's true. They're not just fleeing from the end of the world. They're fleeing from the bad news about the end of the world, because when they're in the ice cream shop, there's a man who stands on the table and starts to shout about the end of the world, and they leave that place immediately. Then they go to the piano bar, where somebody's treating everybody to free drinks. And he looks over at the guy and realizes he knows what's happening, so they leave that place too. So it's funny that they're fleeing the bad news at the same time that they're trying to flee the reality of what's
I guess we should explain, because of the electromagnetic interference and everything, all the telecommunications have been knocked out. So nobody in Los Angeles knows, there's no news about this happening. And he just knows because he has this scientific background. And that's one of the things I really like about this story as a science fiction fan, is that, because this science, it gives you this special insight into your circumstances that other people who don't know science don't have. And I feel like that sort of, appreciation of science, shows up in science fiction and not so much in other forms of fiction.
That's true. He happens to be he's a freelance writer who writes science articles and how-to articles, both of which come in handy in this story. And she's obviously an astronomy buff. She has a telescope that she looks through on the banister of her building. So you're right, plays an important part in their lives before all of this happens.
Yeah, and I mentioned last time that this is one of my favorite science fiction stories of all time, and I hadn't read it since I was a teenager, so I wasn't sure if I came back to it, if it would have, lost its magic for me, but it absolutely had not. I still absolutely love the story. I would absolutely recommend to everybody go out and read it right now. And I think, somewhat unusually for a Larry Niven story, the characters are really well drawn and really engaging. Niven says in his author's note that this is basically a portrait of himself and his wife when they were in their 20s or whatever, and it really comes through. There's sort of a specificity and a concreteness to the characters that really bring them to life and all their sort of foibles and everything.
You're right about that. One thing that jumps out at me when they talk about Leslie and Stan, there's just one scene where he talks about her scratching his back and him scratching her back. And that seemed very specific to me, and I can see that that's something that might come out of his real life. The story won the 1972 Hugo Award, and I agree it's well deserved. And one thing I looked at when I was reading it was I was trying to study how he pulls off the poignancy in the story, and there are asides that are thrown in that really moved me. And one of them was, for example, it's just a throwaway line where he talks about the men on the moon. This is 1972, where we were still sending astronauts to the moon. And he muses whether the astronauts are on the dark side of the moon, and if so, are they protected? And he says, he also says a little bit longer, and we'd have reached the stars. And just that thought, I thought it was very melancholy and poignant. Another scene is where.
Well, actually, let me talk about the astronauts on the moon. He also says, they might survive longer than anyone.
Yeah.
And he says like I felt a stab of hatred for them or something like that. I thought was an interesting psychological moment for the character.
I agree. And you know what? Also, when they talking about time being so valuable to them, now that the end is near. They also contemplate flying to Hawaii, thinking that if they just fly further west, they can get perhaps 2 more hours before sunrise. And he says 2 hours worth any price. And then he comes to realize that's not going to work because the way the Earth was rotating, Los Angeles was really on the extreme opposite side at the time that this happened. But again, the idea that just an extra 2 hours, they would do anything just for that. Another poignant thought. And at the end, there's a semi-optimistic ending in the sense that, there's a relief that it's not actually a supernova that's destroyed the other side of the Earth, but rather an intense solar flare. So that, yes, the other side of the world may be fried, but perhaps this side of the world will survive. So there's a little bit of hope there at the end.
Yeah.
In one of his notes, one of the author's notes, Niven said he ran a story by Jerry Purnell, who reminded him that at heart he's an optimistic writer. So the story needed some sort of optimistic note, and I think this was it.
Yeah, well, he says that he hadn't written the end. He couldn't decide. He had written most of the story, but wasn't sure how to end it. Mm-hmm. And that Jerry Purnell said, "No, you're an optimist. There needs to be an optimistic ending."
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just a spectacularly good story in my opinion, and yeah, I got really sort of emotionally involved in it, reading it, and yeah, it totally lived up to all of my memories of it.
Yeah, it was terrific, and the quote, the Inconstant Moon, the quote it comes from a Romeo and Juliet quote, which is a love story, appropriately enough. But Juliet says, "Swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon, that monthly changes in her circled orb." So interesting that's the words that Niven chooses for the title of his story.
Yeah. So overall, spectacularly good story. Everyone read it right now. Do you have any criticisms of this story?
I don't. I agree with you. I think it's a masterpiece.
Okay, I'll mention two. I mean, one is very. I mean, I guess I think they're both very minor, but one is that it turns out that the son can't go supernova. Our sun is just not the right kind of star to go supernova. And Stan knows this. And he sort of mentions this toward the end of the story, like, oh, this must be a solar flare because the sun can't go supernova. It's not massive enough and so on. And it strikes me as a little bit odd that he didn't think of this sooner. And, you know, I guess I can chalk it up to him just being, you know, panicky or overwhelmed by the situation or whatever and not thinking things through 100%.
Right. That's what I thought, that he was, he initially thought something, even though it makes no sense, that was somehow the sun had gone supernova. And then later on, he comes around to realizing that maybe it was a solar flare.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see if you know, regardless of what the textbooks say, if just the evidence of your senses is that this thing is happening, you might, you know, just disregard your textbook knowledge in favor of what you're seeing with your own two eyes. So I can see that. Mm-hmm. The other thing is that the last line of the story has been somewhat controversial. Did I write it down? But basically he says, you know, maybe would our children colonize Europe or Asia or Africa? And I guess some people, they get the sense from this that it's like, oh, you know, yeah, it's too bad billions of people died, but hey, more land for us.
Well, you know, that's not the sense I got from that at all. He's just talking about the fact that humanity is going to survive this and continue to grow. That's all. Not that, gee, now we get to conquer Europe because it's been destroyed. That's not an interpretation that came to mind at all.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, you know, I would maybe tweak the last line. I mean, I agree with you. I really liked the way the story ends, where he's sort of, you know, having assumed he's going to die this whole night, suddenly he has this sort of giddy sense of hope and is thinking about the future and, oh, we're going to do this and we're going to do that and we have to survive this way. We need to get, I guess we should explain. So what's going to happen since it's a solar flare, they're not all necessarily going to die, but there's at the very least going to be extreme flooding. And so they're up in this high-rise apartment building expecting, you know, most of the floors below them to flood, and maybe they'll have to go up to the roof, but hopefully they'll be all right. And so, yeah, so he's thinking about, you know, we might need scuba gear to scavenge for supplies and stuff like that. He's thinking about the future. And I think that there is kind of a nice character arc in this story where in the beginning we get the sense, you know, he's sort of been seeing a bunch of different women and he's like, oh, you know, could I call this one or could I call this one? Oh, I haven't talked to them in a while, you know, since I met Leslie. But we get the feeling that he's this guy who, you know, is sort of biding his time and not thinking so much about the future because he just is taking for granted that he has lots of time. And then at the end of the story, when he's thinking about, oh, this is what our children will do, there's this nice arc there and this nice sense of closure that he's come to, you know, have a plan for the future and be thinking about his being a father and stuff like that.
Yeah. There's a line that toward the end where he says, damn, I missed the supernova. I missed the nova. Life had been simplicity itself last night, which I thought was funny. And it speaks to that arc you're talking about where he's thinking about the future and planning for the future. Mm-hmm. And earlier in the story, there was another poignant line where he says, this is when he thought that they were dying the next day when he was still planning things. He said, you don't stop planning just because there's no hope. And again, that line just jumped out at me. It's very powerful.
So my idea, I feel like to end the story on the word Africa, sort of like you lose that point a little bit, that this is really about his children that he's thinking. Mm-hmm. And so I have a slight rewrite I was going to suggest, you know, something along the lines of like, we were going to have to explore the far side of the world, see what was there, what was left, but maybe that could be a job for our children. Right. And then I think maybe ending on the word children rather than the word Africa or Europe or Asia or whatever would just maybe
I agree.
Hit that point a little more clearly.
That's a nice rewrite. Let's give Larry Niven a call and see.
But yeah, again, minor points. Overall, spectacularly good story. So David, you also sent me the link for the Outer Limits adaptation.
Yes, I'm so glad that I read the story first. It would have ruined it for me if I had seen the show first, because it was so melodramatic and over the top. I mean, it wasn't terrible, but there are some tweaks that they make. He's a professor, and it's his first date with this woman who owns a bookstore who he's always wanted to ask out. So
and they're middle aged rather than
yeah,
being in
they're
their
middle
20s.
aged, and he just reaches out to her in the middle of the night, and she somehow goes along with it, and he proposes to her, and she accepts, and this is their first date, and then she finds out that he's been hiding from her the fact that the world is ending, and she gets all upset because he dictated how she spent her last night. But then they make up, and it was a little bit cornball. When you're dealing with romance, it's very easy to cross the line into melodrama. They did a good job with the sense of dread. I'll give them credit for that. And the actors did as well as they could with the script. Michael Gross from Family Ties, the father from Family Ties, was pretty good, and Joanne Gleason was good. So I think they did an okay job with a limited budget. So it's just a matter of nuance and gradation, which the story has, and unfortunately the adaptation didn't have.
Yeah, I definitely, like I said, I recommend 100% people read the story. I don't recommend watching the Outer Limits episode at all, unless for some reason you just like don't read fiction or something. And I guess it's better than nothing watching the Outer Limits episode. I mean, I think that, like you say, by the standards of kind of low budget 90s science fiction television, it's okay. But yeah, to me, it completely fails to capture the emotional power of the source material, and also, yeah, like, and it's weird because a lot of the changes they make, I could kind of see in some abstract sense why they would have made this. Like, it's sort of screenwriting 101 stuff, like, oh, this is about realizing that you've wasted time and you're going to try to make up for lost time. Who would feel that more acutely than a middle-aged person who never asked out the woman he was attracted to in years? Like in theory, some of these changes seem like they should work, but I just didn't find that they worked at all.
Yeah.
Actually watching the episode, but I could kind of see what the screenwriters were going for, I guess.
Yeah, no, I see that as well. That maybe they wanted to hit the point that, well, he wanted to ask her out for 3 years and he didn't, and now he's going to make up for that lost time. But her reaction was very peculiar, that she would go along with all of this, even if she was attracted to him, that she would go out and accept his proposal and all of that.
Yeah, and also, I mean, making it so that, I mean, in the story they're already dating, and to make it so that they're not dating at the beginning of the episode, and then she has some sort of like freak out moments, which coming from a woman who I imagine being 24 or something, works better for me than a middle-aged woman. It just makes her seem really unlikable to me. So
yeah.
So yeah, long story short, read the original story, not so much the TV episode.
That's right.
Okay. Any other thoughts on Inconstant Moon, or shall we move on?
Let's move on.
Okay, so our next story is called Rammer. And so in this story, there's a guy, and he's gone into suspended animation, and he wakes up in the future and finds that Earth is now this totalitarian society. And I think he figures out fairly quickly that they've woken up multiple people and executed them when they didn't give the authorities what they wanted, which is they're looking for people to fill certain highly specific roles in their society. And really the only specific role they can see for him is to be a ram scoop pilot. They're sending out these starships to seed other solar systems, like planets on other solar systems with biological materials. And it's like a one-person crew. And they want someone, I guess, who already made the decision to kind of leave everything behind and go off on their own. They think that psychological profile would be good for a starship pilot. But he's not so enthusiastic about this society that he finds himself in. So David, what do you think of Rammer?
Well, look, I loved it. I loved it, and I don't want to. I loved Inconstant Moon, and I loved Rammer, and I loved many of the early stories that we read in our last podcast. There are a few coming up that I didn't like, but I will just. So I'm almost apologetic that two consecutive stories for this podcast I thought were fantastic. This is another one. I thought it had an excellent plot, strong characterization. Given the again for Niven, it's always a standout point when you have a strong character. In this case, somebody who's been mind wiped, essentially resurrected in a prisoner's body, and forced to be really abused, enslaved, manipulated, really tortured through the whole story. While he's kept in this prisoner facility with a bunch of bunk beds, an open toilet, and a bunk bed where men and women can have sex, but it has to be out in the open. So he's kind of modest, and but anyway, he's enslaved and he's forced to take this training, this RNA training, which is teaching through injections. They sit him in a training chair and they inject him with knowledge that will help him become a starship pilot. And he becomes adept at that, at becoming a starship pilot. He passes all of their various tests. They reveal to him that he can, he doesn't need to be accompanied by a woman because he's shown that he can be celibate because of the fact that he did not have any sort of sexual relations while in this prison. And by the way, there's a scene, just jumping from that point, there's a scene where he kind of in anger goes back to the prison and he attempts to have sexual intercourse with a woman who's interested in him in the prison, and finds that he's impotent, and he's kind of impotent and heartbroken and humiliated. So this character is
because of all the people watching, he just
everybody's watching,
can't go through with it.
He can't do it, and it's just humiliating and heartbreaking, and so this character is really put through the ringer. So and at the end he becomes a starship pilot, and in the end he gives them a big FU at the end, which which is highly satisfying to the reader, which is he decides to using his advanced knowledge of the starship to veer off in a completely different direction than where they were sending him. But he wants to do so in a way that before he does that, he wants to make sure that his prison guards that they're aware of the fact that he's rebelled. So he makes sure that they get the message while they're still alive that he's gone off to a different area of space. And by the way, his whole mission is to drop off these kind of these packages that are to terraform planets. He's supposed to drop these pods off in different worlds that theoretically can sustain and evolve life. So that's his mission. But instead, he goes off in a different direction and says "F you." So what a great ending, and a really satisfying read. I really enjoyed this.
Well, let me say so. So this character, I just want to note, is named Jerome Branch Corbell, which is a very obvious nod to the early 20th century fantasy writer James Branch Cabell, who will come back later in this group of stories. I really liked maybe the first 2/3 of this. All the like interstellar, like preparing for an interstellar voyage stuff, I thought was extraordinarily well done. It all felt very believable and deeply researched. And I appreciated too, like, I feel like for whatever reason, most authors writing this scenario of this guy who wakes up in this totalitarian future would have the character act like just a total dick, like a total contrarian, and just like talk back and everything. And it always bothers me when characters are not smart in stories, and I feel like this guy is smart, and he realizes right away, oh, if I talk back to these people, I'm just going to be, eliminated, and they're going to wake up the next person. So he kind of plays along. And so all that stuff I thought was really good. I had a big problem with the ending of the story where he basically he's like, okay, thanks for the starship. Now I'm just going to go do what I want with it. And it seems like this super controlling totalitarian society never realized that he might do this, when it seems like that would be pretty obvious. And there's no controls to prevent him from doing that. And he doesn't have to do anything clever or anything. It's just like they hand him the keys and he takes off with their starship. I mean, we saw the same thing a little bit in Neutron Star, where Beowulf Schaefer was originally planning to just steal the puppeteer's ship until which made a little bit more sense because the puppeteers are a little bit like naive and, not human and everything, until the UN intelligence operative told the puppeteers, no, you got to plant a bomb on this ship or else this guy's just going to steal your ship.
Right.
So yeah, that was kind of a big stumbling point for me. Was it just seems like these characters would have, like just the fact that he might just steal the ship and take off with it was something that they would have anticipated.
Yeah, I mean, the reason why it didn't bother me so much was because I thought that they had broken him. I mean, the whole story, he's been totally broken down. By the end, they figure he's going to do what they say. So I was able to overlook that a little bit, but it's a good point you make. And you're right. In Neutron Star, they did plant the bomb on the ship to make sure that the human went along with the plans, which makes more sense. But boy, maybe also I was blinded by the fact that I was so pleased by the ending.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, that if they thought that all their psychological conditioning and what's the word, sort of selection process had been effective in everything. I guess maybe if the story hit that point a little bit harder, that he was deceiving them into thinking that he had been been shaped by them, then maybe I think that might have worked a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, overall, again, for me, the strength of the story again was really just the hard science fiction details of the ship and the the training process and stuff. I just really thought that was first rate.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Did they use the term corpuscles in this story, or is that in the Defenseless Dead, or in both?
Because, I mean, definitely in the Defenseless Dead. I don't remember if it was in this one or not.
Okay, well, that's one of Niven's favorite themes is putting people in suspended animation.
Yeah. I mean, he says in his author's note, he says that this was a pretty popular theme at the time, and that he was, I think in his mind, he was, trying to subvert it or put new spins on it or something.
Yeah. But yeah, good stuff.
Yeah. Okay, next story is called Cloak of Anarchy. This is another story that really, just at least the premise, really stuck in my mind over all these decades. But so basically, it's in the future, and they have this place called King's Free Park, I think. And it's this park where you can go, and once you're in the park, there's no rules. You can do anything you want. You can, vandalize or steal or, whatever you want to do. The only limit is that you can't physically harm another person. And they have these kind of police drones called Cop's Eyes. And if they see anyone attempting to physically harm another person, they'll kind of shoot a stun ray and stun both people and kind of break it up. But otherwise, it's kind of anything goes. So, David, what'd you think of Cloak of Anarchy?
I thought this was really, really long. Really long, and I bounced off of it hard.
They're going to get longer.
I bounced off of it hard because this is one of those cases where I'm able to forgive Niven when maybe his characters are stock characters and they're not that well developed, because he's usually got a fantastic plot to go along with it. And in this case, I just really, to me, it was all just an idea, which is, let's create these free parks where, basically the automobile is now a thing of the past. So there are all these freeways all over California, and the San Diego freeway has been turned into this giant free park, which reminds me.
Let me just explain, because everybody has flying cars. That's why they don't need the freeways anymore.
Okay. But that reminds me a little bit of in New York, they have the High Line, which is an abandoned elevated railroad tracks. And they turned that into a big park that stretches across much of lower Manhattan. You can walk that where there's lots of trees and grass overgrowing the train tracks. But anyway, they've turned these freeways into these free parks where, in theory, they're anarchistic. You can go and you can do anything you want. And these drones. They're called cop size, but they're really, I mean, they are present day drones, but make sure there's no violence. Otherwise, anything goes, as you said. But I just, I did not get pulled into any sort of plot. I just thought it was exploring this concept. You see things happening. I was not pulling for any particular character. It was very ideas oriented, saying, let's see what happens if you get rid of any sort of government intervention. What happens to this it's really fake anarchy because there's enforcement by the government against violence. What it reveals is not a very particularly deep idea, which is without any sort of government enforcement, it becomes very violent and savage. Overall, I didn't care for this one. And as I said, I think it's overly long too to make that point.
Yeah. So Niven says in his author's note that he wrote this story to explain why he's not a libertarian. And I think that there's definitely a danger to writing any work of fiction or producing any piece of art to make a political, like a sort of straightforward political point, which is that you can just kind of lose any kind of interesting nuance or complexity. And yeah, I agree with you. The story, sort of the way I remembered the story was that I found the idea of the free parks really fascinating, but the way I remembered the story was that the story just was kind of written to make the point that anarchy as a political philosophy is unworkable, and that just kind of message just kind of got hammered home too bluntly and at the expense of story, and that was definitely how it read to me coming back to it. I mean, I guess I'll explain. Actually, what happens in the plot is that the main character has this friend named Ron Cole, who's a political anarchist, and he thinks that even these cop's eyes are too much. And so he's also kind of a tinkerer, kind of technologist, like wacko mad scientist kind of guy. So he conspires to knock out this network of cop's eyes because he's hoping to make the point that society doesn't need any sort of supervision at all, that people left to their own devices will kind of self-organize into private entities to perform any function that government could do even better than government can. Yeah, I think this is all crazy. I mean, like I just can't imagine what this character could be thinking. Like, even for the sake of argument, if I were to accept that anarchy as a political philosophy could be workable, clearly in this situation, with this sudden transition, for a couple hours, it's not going to, obviously not going to work. So it doesn't really seem to me the story is critiquing anarchism as a political philosophy in any serious way.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And, what happens is fights break out. These men that are dressed in feathers fight this cloaked woman. They get into a fist fight, and this fountain gets taken over by a small group of people that won't give anybody access to it. So things fall apart fast, and I was amused by the idea of these cop's eyes that simply knock out both people anytime there's any sort of a fight takes place. So if anybody attacks you, you slap them in the face, and you're both knocked out. But yeah, as I said, I bounced off of this one.
Yeah, I agree. Once it gets into so like a group of bullies take over a drinking fountain, they won't let anybody drink, and there's kind of like a toing and froing over that. I got really bored at that point in the story. I mean, I was thinking I don't know if you could rewrite this particular plot in a way that I would love, but I mean, I think one tweak that would be a little bit better is that if they had to convince the Ron Cole guy to bring the cop's eyes back online, and sort of instead of the drinking fountain thing, the plot was about how do we get the cop's eyes back online, and then convince, because he is eventually persuaded. He abandons his entire political philosophy after seeing the events of this story. But it doesn't
when he can't get a drink of water at the fountain, he changes his whole political philosophy.
Yes, but it doesn't really affect that change of heart doesn't really affect the plot particularly. But if they had to persuade him in order to get him to fix the drones, I think that might be a little bit more A little
Or
bit
maybe
more.
if they needed to get somewhere for some important reason, they have to cut across the park in some way, and that might add more drama. There might actually be a more compelling story to push you through. But anyway,
Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think it's an interesting idea, but maybe needs or like definitely needs a better plot to go with it.
yeah.
One thing that's kind of interesting is in one of his author's notes, Larry Niven says that this Ron Cole character was inspired by two real people, Russell Seitz, who was known in who was known in East Coast fandom, Russell Seitz, and another guy named Don Simpson, who was known in West Coast science fiction fandom. And Niven sort of combined the two into one character. And then all the East Coast fans recognized Russell and all the West Coast fans recognized Don. So I thought that was kind of funny. And then actually in, I think it's in End Space, he relates this funny anecdote where Russell complained to Larry Niven that he hadn't gotten his permission to Tuckerize him, to use him as a character in the story. And they had kind of this joking duel with champagne bottles to settle it. So I don't know. That was interesting.
That was way more amusing than the story itself.
Yeah, I don't know. And these again, these free parks seem like an interesting idea, but I just don't. It seems like only a very small number of really dedicated people would ever go into them. I mean, like, we're told that you have to leave your valuables in a locker because, you know, obviously people are just going to steal anything you bring into the park. So I just don't understand. It just seems like a lot of resources to construct these things. And I don't really know how many people would even really be interested in going into them. So
in one of his notes, Larry Niven mentions that he makes a point of the fact that we never see the world outside of the parks and what it looks like. I'm not sure what point he's making by making that point, actually, other than, you know, is it, you know, what kind of society are they escaping from into these parks? Is it a totalitarian type state? Is it a democracy? Is it, you know, what is it that's pushing people to go and seek out this anarchistic state? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's particularly weird is that Ron Cole somehow thinks that like private police forces are going to quickly form, but you're in this park where no one in practice brings any sort of currency or any valuable items. So it's like, how are you going to pay any private police? Like, it just, yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, one thing that's kind of funny too is that in one of his author's notes for the story, Niven says, "I wrote this to explain why I'm not a libertarian." And then in another author's note 20 years later, he says, "I vote libertarian." So I guess he changed his mind, or I'm not sure.
Interesting.
But apparently even he wasn't persuaded by the story not to vote libertarian. All right, but I don't want to just keep trashing that story. So let's move on to the fourth profession. So in this story, there's a bartender, and he wakes up after a night of heavy drinking where he was kind of blackout drunk, and he sort of vaguely remembers that he took a bunch of pills from an alien trader kind of character who came to his bar, but he doesn't remember exactly how many pills he took or what they do. And it turns out that he has to figure it out because these aliens are going to destroy Earth. And he has to, figuring out what he did last night while he was drunk becomes key to saving the world. So, David, what did you think of the fourth profession?
I really liked this one a lot. I thought it was a really interesting, noir mystery surrounding these aliens who they look so freakishly different. We never really see them because they come into the bar cloaked. They have. But he does mention they have 4 hands that look like chicken feet, and no arms, and a skull that looks like a giant ear. But we never really see them. They're covered up in hooded cloaks, and they glide into the bar. That's why they're called monks, because they're dressed like monks. And also, interestingly weird that they go into this bar. By the way, there's only two alien ships have approached Earth. One is in a starship that's orbiting the moon, and the other is sort of a shuttlecraft that's landed in the East River of Manhattan. So those are the only places where humanity is aware that these aliens are located. But yet, in a West Coast bar, a monk shows up and he starts ordering different drinks at the bar, working his way through the different types of liquors, which is wonderfully weird. I like that. And as he pays for the drinks with these knowledge pills, and so the mystery is which pills did the bartender take, and what abilities do they convey to him? Because the first pill is a language pill that allows him to speak the alien language, any language fluently, and understand any language fluently. And he takes some other pills as well. And as the story unfolds, he's working with, he's being investigated by a man named Bill Morris, who's with the Secret Service, who's trying to figure out what exactly he's learned from the aliens. So he's under investigation. He's working with this guy, and they're trying to solve that mystery. He also works with this woman named Louise at his bar, who's also also taken a pill, and she's trying to figure out what strange abilities the aliens have given to her. And all this kind of unfolds kind of neatly. As it turns out, one of the pills allows him to teleport, except it only works if he were in a different alien body. As a human, he's unable to teleport, but he has the knowledge of how to do it. So I found that amusing. Ultimately, he learns that one of the pills gives him the knowledge and the skills to pilot a starship. So he uses those skills as well in the story as they, eventually they concoct a plan to approach the monk the next night, because they expect him to return to continue ordering drinks at the bar to find out, find out what powers he's been given by the aliens, and also to discuss with the alien the fact that the aliens want humanity to build them something called a laser launching device. It's kind of to allow space travel and to launch their ship. Humanity, doesn't know how to do this, but the aliens have a philosophy that any civilization that's unable to build one of these devices is really an animal species, not worthy of living. So the danger is that instead of using this device to propel their ship, what they'll do is they'll make the star go supernova and use that as a propellant. So basically, all of humanity is in danger unless they can figure out a way to solve this problem, which by the end they do.
Well, I loved that, the hard science fiction aspect of this story, of this idea of these aliens who, they visit one species and trade with them, and then require that they build a laser launcher to propel them to their next destination. And that's why, if we didn't say, that's why the alien is doing all this drinking, is because he's looking for products to potentially buy and trade on a future, with future species that he comes into contact with. And just this idea that the aliens, if they don't get their laser launcher, they're just going to cause our sun to go supernova, and that'll propel them to their next destination. I thought was great. And at one point, I think one of the characters says something like, well, they wouldn't do that because, they'll just lose one of their customers. But it turns out that the trade route takes like 64,000 years or something to go around. So they're not really particularly concerned. There's a line like, when you trade in interstellar distances, there's no repeat customers or something like that.
I love that line. Yeah.
So that I loved. And then I thought that this premise of the bartender who has to figure out what strange alien pills he took the night before was engaging. Mm-hmm. Speaking of stories being too long, I thought that this one was too long. Mm-hmm. And so how it turns out at the end is that the key pill that the bartender has to figure out what it does, it was like a prophet pill, which gave him sort of Jesus-like abilities. And
right, prophet being PROPHET.
Yeah, that's a good clarification there on an audio podcast. Yeah. And that seemed pretty silly to me. Especially in contrast to some of the what I thought was really pretty inspired hard science fiction stuff that we had gotten earlier. And actually in his author's note, Niven says that he started writing this story without knowing how many pills the bartender had taken or what any of them did. And then he kind of figured it out as he went along and kind of went back and rewrote stuff to make it work. But I felt like you could kind of tell that he had not.
I was losing track of the pills because I swear I counted more than 4 pills.
It got really confusing.
Wasn't there a pill that allowed him to be like, gave him like acrobatic powers? And then a pill that gave him language powers, a pill that gave him teleportation powers, and then finally the starship captain powers. So that left a 5th pill that was the prophet powers. And then the woman took a pill as well.
Yeah, I think the less said about that, the better.
That was an unfortunate part of the story. Yes. Unfortunate, unfortunately, her pill allows her to become more attractive to men and to draw a husband.
To be like the perfect housewife, female companion, basically.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
But yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't know if you go through the story, and also at one point he's like, "Oh, I thought I had taken this many, but then I actually gave one to somebody else." It got super confusing, and I don't know if that's to what degree that was because Larry Niven was kind of making it up as he went along. But I definitely thought that the story could have used at the very least, could have used a second draft where he just rewrote it from scratch, knowing what all the pills were and everything, and made it half as like. If I were his editor, I would say, rewrite this from scratch and make it half as long. Like, this is kind of like a funny, at its heart, it's just kind of like a funny, goofy story. It's like, dude, where's my car? Kind of, this should not be as long and as complicated as it is. Yeah.
And at the end, he's using his prophet powers. He's able to persuade the aliens themselves that, hey, if you need help building one of these laser launchers, then you're reverting to animal state yourself. And they go, oh, wow, that's a good point. They think that's a good point because he's able to use his powers of persuasion as a prophet. So that's part of the solution at the end, where they won't make our sun go supernova after all.
Yeah, but then it's kind of like, why would they have given him this incredibly powerful power that'll even work on them? Yeah, just to pay for some bottles of alcohol. Like, I don't know. It seemed kind of weird.
Yeah, but it was a fun story.
Yeah. I just think it needed a different. Yeah, the final pill I thought should have turned out to be something a little different. I don't know what it was, what it should have been, but yeah, it just seemed. It seems like he almost even got like magical powers and stuff from this prophet pill. Like, he could change water into wine and cause. I think they give him like pills to erase his memories, powers. And he's able to use his magic prophet powers to cause the pills to disappear from his esophagus. I don't know. That's right. Yes. It got too goofy. It got too goofy for me. Yeah. Okay, but so let's move on to the next story. Flash Crowd. So this story was written for an anthology called 3 Trips in Time and Space, edited by Robert Silverberg. It featured original novellas by Larry Niven, John Brunner, and Jack Vance. And they were all written to the prompt, imagine a world, like a future world where teleportation is just everywhere, is just cheap and ubiquitous, basically. And so Larry Niven imagines this world where there are teleport booths, which are basically like telephone booths, except they teleport you to your destination. And the main character is kind of like a roving reporter. He's almost like a vlogger, before vlogging was a thing, where he just kind of uses these teleport booths to teleport around and record what he sees and hope to catch some newsworthy event to send to his editor. And so he watches, or he kind of witnesses, a shoplifter knock over a police officer, and he reports that a fight has broken out or a riot has broken out, and more people start teleporting in to see it, and it ends up turning into this giant out of control riot where people are looting and all the teleport booths are mobbed so nobody can teleport out, and this is the first time this has really happened, some large scale disaster like this in this world. And so then and people all blame him for sort of inciting this. So then he sets out to figure out what's up with these teleport booths, and is there any, like, go around interviewing experts and stuff. And is there any solution to this problem of these flash mobs suddenly forming without warning at any time and place? So David, what'd you think of Flash Crowd?
I thought it was actually less interesting than Cloak of Anarchy. I thought it was similar to Cloak of Anarchy in the sense that it's exploring the concept and digging really deep into that concept. In this case, gee, what if we had these teleportation booths, and how would it work, and what would the rules be, and our news taper, he's called a news taper person. He's investigating this. These things have been around for 20 years, but he decides to do an expose to figure out exactly how they operate, what the ramifications of them are. And again, I was really not engaged because it was just exploring this concept. There's no story. There's no story. He's interviewing different people about how these things operate, and how are airline stocks affected by the fact that we have teleportation booths? Well, that's going to be quite a hit on that, isn't it? Well, no, because at first the teleport booths could only go a certain distance, but now they can go further distances. Well, what about smuggling? Oh, well, smuggling is allowed. What about the abandoned highways? Really, really looking at every ramification of these teleportation booths from kind of just this cold clinical perspective where he's interviewing different people. What about burglary? Well, there's lots of burglaries, but people have teleportation booths nearby, so the police can teleport right in if there's burglars. What about murder alibis? Well, that's the problem. You no longer have an alibi because you could be anywhere, anytime. And it's like he's ruminating on all these ramifications without a plot. He's just interviewing these different people, and then to try to solve this problem of how do we avoid these riots from taking place? How do we ensure that in the future millions of people from around the globe don't teleport in to see some criminal act or some event or something and cause a riot? But it's really a lengthy exercise in world building without plot or characterization. So it just left me cold. And by the way, I love the way he uses the technology in Ringworld. I don't know if you remember, Dave, the way he opens up Ringworld is with our main characters teleporting around the world, and you get to see how the different cultures are kind of watered down because you kind of develop this global culture because travel is so easy. So I like the way he handled it in Ringworld, but at least there was a story. Here it's just world building with nothing else.
Yeah, it was interesting actually to see, because I think of these teleport booths as being such a integral part of the known space universe, to see that it all just came out of this, this anthology that Robert Silverberg was editing, where he's like, "Hey, Larry, I need a novella from you for this." And Larry Niven says that actually he just tried to think of something and just couldn't come up with anything. And so he actually sat down and wrote 2 lists, just kind of laying out what all the ramifications of this sort of teleport technology would be. And then I feel like in this story, he just kind of like included it all, like everything that was on those lists. And I think part of the problem might be that it sounds like Robert Silverberg specifically solicited a novella from him, so a longer piece. I mean, this story, I forget, it's 40 or 50 pages long. It's really long. Yeah. So I feel like he was just kind of like writing to fill up pages more so than maybe if he had just, had the idea unrelated to that book. But yeah, as like with Cloak of Anarchy, I think as a story, this one kind of falls flat for me, as you say.
Yeah.
I do want to give Niven credit. He does really, I think, a brilliant job of figuring out what the ramifications of this teleportation technology would be, and really sort of prefigures a lot of the stuff we see in internet culture with, hate mobs and stuff, where, there'll be just some small, some small incident or disagreement or something, and then people start jumping on it, and it kind of is this feedback loop where more and more people are jumping in, and because all these people are paying attention to it, more and more people are jumping in because they want the attention, they want the spotlight, And there's even a part where he says, Angela Monk, a semi-porno movie actress, very beautiful in a dress of loose mesh net, made from white braided yarn, very self-possessed in the split second before she saw what she'd flicked into. But so you have these kind of like influencer. I mean, this is how I read this. These kind of influencer types coming to this riot because they want the spotlight. They want. He says, people, whatever like axe to grind will just show up because this is what people are paying attention to, and so all that stuff, really does remind me of internet culture, and I think he's very present in that.
Yeah. That's a good point. By the way, I like that when she pops in, she sees that there's a riot and she tries to pop back into the teleportation booth, but somebody's already jumped in. So she's trapped. Everybody's fighting to get into the booths, in and out of the booths. So it was well depicted.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I definitely tuned out. I can read you some of my notes. As I went along, I wrote, plot stops advancing here. Niven definitely kind of loses his effectiveness at longer lengths. Too much focus on the logistics of teleportation. Niven should have just written an article on teleportation. It's kind of... Yeah, and I think he did actually a couple years before this write a article on teleportation. I wasn't able to track down the actual text of it, but maybe that was part of why Robert Silverberg wanted him for this book. But I mean, there's no question that he's thought a lot about teleportation and has some good insights into it. It's just this story is
I know. I mean, as you say, if he could have done, instead of a novella, he could have done like a little. I was thinking of remember the Superman story, Man of Steel, Woman.
Yeah.
He could have done like a short pseudo article like that, kind of a very short piece on teleportation rather than this. I don't know. It just goes on and on and on.
Yeah, just to explain for listeners. So last episode, we talked about Larry Niven's essay, Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex, which explores Superman's sex life. So yeah, maybe a kind of a little article like that would have been fine. Although then I guess we wouldn't have had all the teleport stuff in known space, which is actually pretty cool. So
right. Well,
but basically what happens in terms of the plot, such as it is that at the end of the story, it turns out that this shoplifter at the beginning was sort of a career criminal who just teleports from place to place, shoplifting everywhere she goes. And so somehow when people find this out, that kind of directs their animus toward her. So our reporter character is off the hook. In the meantime, he's kind of come up with the idea that, maybe the solution to this is that when a riot starts, the teleportation booths are kind of rerouted so that all the people attempting to join the riot all just end up in kind of police holding facilities.
Right. But then he was saying, well, the police facilities would be overrun. So he thought about teleporting them into these giant stadiums. So
yeah, I mean, which is fine as far as it goes, but I didn't feel like we needed 52 pages to come to that idea.
No, we did not.
So yeah, cool ideas.
I think you're right, David. That as the stories get longer, I like them less. Interestingly enough.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hadn't noticed this before, but I did notice that the stories in this Best of Larry Niven book are more or less in chronological order by date of publication. I mean, not completely; it's mixed up a little bit, but more or less we go from his earliest stories to his latest stories, and I think I have a hunch we might start liking them less as we go, because I think maybe Niven, maybe his focus was more on the novels after a certain point, and he was just writing the shorter things, to fulfill obligations, or maybe he'd used up a lot of his favorite ideas early on, or something. But I did get the sense, just from what I read online, that people were really more enamored with his earlier stuff than his later stuff.
Right.
But we shall see.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely, and especially in the middle here, there are 3 40 or 50 page long stories. Actually, the next one we're going to get to, I liked quite a bit, so that's a counterpoint. But yeah, I think in general, the shorter ones work better for me, or at least actually I think I'm going to end up saying kind of the medium. Like the 20, like there's some in here that are too short that we'll get to, that are like 10 or 15 pages that I think could be developed more. And then there's some that are way too long that are 40 or 50 pages. Whereas the sweet spot, I think, is sort of the 20 to 35 page.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. I agree with that.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's get to our next story. It's called The Defenseless Dead. And so this is the middle story from a book that was a huge favorite of mine growing up, a very formative work of science fiction for me growing up, called The Long Arm of Gil Hamilton. And so this is set in the same universe as a story that we talked about last time called The Jigsaw Man, where it's this future where the technology exists to basically make all citizens immortal if they can just get the right organ transplants. And so the limiting factor becomes the supply of organs. And because there's such a high demand for organs, the government has made more and more crimes punishable by the death penalty so that they can harvest the criminals for their organs, even if all they did was traffic violations, as we saw in the Jigsaw Man. And so against that backdrop, you have this character, Gil Hamilton, who is like a policeman who works for the United Nations. And he's one of actually Larry Niven's most memorable characters because he used to be an asteroid miner. And at one point, there was an accident where an asteroid came by and sheared off one of his arms. And while he was waiting for a transplant, there's like this phantom limb syndrome where people will imagine that they can still feel a limb even once they've lost it. So in his case, he sort of develops this telekinetic arm, this kind of psychic ghost arm. And so he can use it to pick up objects. And actually, there's an incredibly memorable scene in the first Gil Hamilton story where he's been captured by one of the organ leggers, these criminals who kidnap people and disassemble them for their organs and sell them on the black market. He's been captured by one of these criminals, and Gil Hamilton, he does this trick where he smokes a cigarette with his ghost arm. Oh, he did eventually get, sorry, this is a little complicated, but he did eventually get an arm transplant, but he's now able to move his ghost arm independently of his physical arm. So he does a trick to pick up girls in bars where he smokes a cigarette without, with this invisible arm of his. And so this criminal wants to see him do this trick. And so the criminal puts a cigarette lighter on a like rolling cart and rolls it over to him because he knows he doesn't want to get too close to him. And so Gil Hamilton is smoking his cigarette, and then he just all of a sudden just jams it into his eye because the eyes are really valuable. And he knows this is going to upset the organ legger. And so the organ legger, without thinking, rushes forward to stop him. And Gil Hamilton reaches his ghost arm into the guy's chest and squeezes his heart until he's dead. Mm. And this buys Gil enough time for his police buddies to rescue him. And that's always stuck out in my mind. It's just one of the absolute coolest scenes in all of science fiction that I've ever read. And so I'm still absolutely baffled that they didn't include that story in this book. It's called Death by Ecstasy, the first Gil Hamilton story, although those events are referenced in this story, the second story, The Defenseless Dead. Niven actually says in his author's note that that the editor of the book, Jonathan Strahan, wanted Death by Ecstasy, but Larry Niven, thought that the Defenseless Dead was a better story, so insisted that it be included instead. And I haven't read Death by Ecstasy since I was a teenager, so I can't say, but I don't understand why it wasn't included, maybe in place of some other story in this book. But that was all a little long-winded. But that's basically the setup for the story. So, David, what'd you think of The Defenseless Dead?
I liked it. I didn't love it, but I liked it. It was, again, an interesting noir detective story involving a bit of a complicated plot involving... First of all, our protag, Gil Hamilton, is at a restaurant when somebody in the restaurant shoots at him. So that's kind of one of the plot elements, is trying to figure out who shot at him and why. It's after he uses his phantom arm to light a cigarette, and which I agree that's a super cool concept. The idea that you have telekinetic powers that operate kind of as if though you had an arm when you're missing a limb. I think it's a very cool concept. So one of the plot threads involves that, somebody who takes a shot at him at a restaurant. Then the other plot thread involves these people that are cryogenically frozen are not allowed by law to own property. So their heirs stand to inherit a tremendous amount of wealth. So there are persons out there who are potential heirs to large fortunes who may not currently have enough finances to protect themselves, to hire security guards, for example. And so one of them is kidnapped along with his sister, and the sister is driven insane. So our protagonist, Gil Hamilton, is trying to solve those two plot threads: who shot at him and who kidnapped this heir and his sister. And it gets a little bit challenging to follow, but I think I was able to get most of it.
Yeah, it's actually super complicated. So actually, let me fill in some of the stuff because I've read this story a bunch of times. So in the recent past, there was something that the characters referred to as the first freezer bill, which is you had all of these healthy young kids who had themselves frozen because they wanted to wake up in the future once all the Earth's problems had been solved. And in the future, the society decides, we don't want these kids. They're just going to be a drain on the system if we wake them up. But we do want their organs, so we're just going to disassemble them for their organs. And so that's what happens to the first round of frozen people. And now, but then the society has used up all those organs and they want more. So they've gone back and they're like, well, there's all these people who are frozen. Oh, and also the excuse was that these kids are indigent, that they didn't save money, or maybe they did, but their investments, fell apart or like whatever. And so if we wake them up now, they'll just be a drain on the system. But then there's a second group of frozen people who actually are wealthy on paper, but they declare, but these are people who had themselves frozen because they had severe mental illnesses that couldn't be cured in their time. And we're hoping in the future their illnesses would be able to be cured. And people in the future are like, well, it's, maybe we could cure some of them now, but it would be kind of a pain. And they have all the habits of thought from decades of being mentally ill. And is it really worth the trouble? And besides, we really want their organs. So this second freezer bill is being contemplated to harvest all those people for their organs. And since these people, a lot of them are really rich, it means that people are going to inherit potentially. There's people out there in the society who are potentially going to inherit lots of money.
Yeah. And the first guy who takes the person who takes a shot at him at the restaurant, it turns out is actually somebody who was an organ legger, right? Who retired after the first freezer bill went into law. So he's now retired. They've used up those organs, I guess, but he's in that body, and I'm not sure why he takes a shot at our protag. Is it because of his phantom limb? I don't know, but.
Well, actually, let me talk about that, because I think this is the biggest problem with this story. Unless I'm missing something, like so it's set up as this mystery. Like, why did this organ legger who had and what happened was that when the first freezer bill passed, it flooded the market with organs. So the organ leggers were kind of driven out of business at that time because the value of no one was willing to pay for black market organs when non-black market organs were easily obtainable.
Mm-hmm.
And so at that time, this guy kind of retired, but then he sees Gil Hamilton and recognizes him from his ghost arm and decides to try to take him out on the spur of the moment, with like essentially a deer hunting rifle, when much better weapons are easily obtainable in this society. So the question is presented to the reader, why was this guy so determined on the spur of the moment to kill Gil Hamilton? That's presented to us as a mystery.
Yeah.
And then my reading of the story is that he really had no reason. he just hated Gil Hamilton and did it on the spur of the moment.
Okay.
Which is very, very disappointing. I mean, from a detective story construction standpoint, it feels like a cheat and just really falls flat to me. There might be something I'm missing, but that's how I read the story. So that's my main problem with the story, is that we're presented with what seems to be this mystery we're supposed to solve, and then there's no real solution to it.
Right. I mean, the second plot thread I thought was resolved fine, which is that the heir who's kidnapped, it turns out is actually being inhabited by another organ legger, right? His body is hosting the brain and spinal column of this this criminal, and he's had his sister committed and turned insane, so using his phantom limb, he's able to reach into his body and figure out that he's not who he claims he is, that he's got scars that indicate that he's actually an organ legger himself. So I thought that sort of made sense, but I was pushing hard here to try to follow the threads of the mystery.
I mean, I think that's cool. I mean, you might need to read it a second time because it does get very complicated. But I think the mystery involving the organ legger Anubis, who is essentially impersonating this heir to this corpsical fortune, I think that all works really. I think that's really well constructed.
Yeah.
It's a mystery, and all the clues are there, and everything.
I agree. So since we're using the word corpsical, I will mention that I read somewhere that the term is credited to Niven, but actually was originated by his editor, Frederick Pohl, in a short story called The Age of the Pussyfoot back in 1969, which predates these stories. So just the side fact there, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting. And if people don't know, Frederick Pohl, in addition to being a very high-profile science fiction editor, was also a very, very accomplished science fiction author in his own right. Yeah. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that he would have originated.
You should do Gateway in one of your future podcasts, Dave.
Yeah, no, I love Gateway. Yeah. But so yeah, and so that whole mystery I think is really well set up. All the pieces are there to solve it, and just the moment, I don't know if this wasn't 100% clear, but these heirs who were kidnapped by organ leggers, that's backstory. So by the time of this particular story, they've been recovered by the police, but the sister has been committed to a mental hospital because she's just completely catatonic and won't respond to anybody. And so there's a scene where Gil Hamilton goes to visit her at the mental hospital and is talking to the doctor and brings up some stuff related to the case. And she just turns and stares at him. And it's the first time that she's ever reacted in any way since she was recovered. And that moment I think is really, really cool and creepy.
It's creepy what they did to her. They turned her into like what is it? A wirehead is the term they use. That they overstimulate her and turn her catatonic. It sounds like something that's definitely out of the Ringworld novels, right? Somebody has that power to use to inflict almost like a pleasure whip.
Yeah. Well, so in the previous story, Death by Ecstasy, which I'm going to try to restrain myself from saying over and over again, it should have been included in this book. But the premise of that one is that there are these devices that you can sort of have like implants put in your head. So that you can just plug yourself into a wall and directly stimulate the pleasure centers of your brain with electrical current. And so sometimes people will like get so wrapped up in this that they'll just forget to eat and just die still plugged into the wall. And this has happened to one of Gil's friends. But he suspects that it wasn't like an accidental death, that it was murder. It was like a murder made to look like a suicide, basically, or an accident. So what happens in this story is that apparently they have these helmets that you can put on that induce the pleasure centers of your brain with like microwaves or something, so that you don't have to have an implant. And they do this so that people can try it out before they go through the whole surgery and everything. And so they just left one of these helmets on this woman for 9 days. And after 9 days of having the pleasure centers of her brain overstimulated with electrical current, she just had lost interest in anything except getting more. And so when Gil Hamilton mentions something that gives her the idea that she might be able to re-experience this feeling, that's the only time she ever reacts to anything.
Okay, that explains that.
So all the stuff I think is really, really super cool. I mean, it sounds like, David, that it does not come through to even an attentive reader on a first reading necessarily.
Yeah, not all of it does. I think I got 75% of it. Even with that, I thought it was enough to keep my interest. It was engaging. And I was trying to make sense of it, and I thought that I just missed some things. But it actually makes me feel good that there were some things that are not there, like why he shot him at the restaurant. But yeah, I liked it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, because I remember the first two Gil Hamilton stories, Death by Ecstasy and this one, The Defenseless Dead, being the best.
They should have included that first one, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that.
Okay.
But from what I read online, people apparently the consensus is that this one is one of the weaker Gil Hamilton stories, which kind of surprised me, and especially given that Niven says it's better than Death by Ecstasy. So there's apparently some disagreement about how to rank these different stories. But I'm not even so necessarily so attached to any particular story. I just love this Oregon Lager future. I think is really, really cool and really, really well realized in all these stories. And there's just, all this, like the scene. Okay, so there's a scene where Gil Hamilton goes to this like freezer bank where they have all the corpuscles stored, and he's talking to the like administrator or something. And I thought that scene was great. And I thought that character was actually really interesting. And I just wanted to read. So the administrator says, "What did those freeze-out kids do that was worth killing them for?" And Gil Hamilton thinks, "They wanted to sleep it out while others broke their backs, turning the world into paradise. But it's no capital crime." And the administrator says, "They had nobody to defend them, nobody but me." And there's just something so poignant about that moment to me. So I just love this world, even if the plots maybe don't always land 100%.
Yeah, that was very powerful. I agree with that. And by the way, I loved also in our last podcast we discussed the Jigsaw Man. I think that's the same universe, and I love that one too. Yeah. All
right, cool. I think that's all my notes on that. All right, so let's move on to next story, The Flight of the Horse. So this is a story where there's a time traveler, and he lives in a post-apocalyptic future where pretty much all the past, they have no knowledge of the past, and all the most of the life forms on Earth are now extinct and everything. And so the Secretary General, who's sort of like the king, basically sends this guy Svets back in time because the Secretary General wants a horse because they came across a scrap of a children's book or something that had a picture of a horse, which is unknown in their time. And so he wants Svets to go retrieve a horse for him so he can ride it. So David, what did you think of The Flight of the Horse?
I thought this was a lot of fun. It was really tongue-in-cheek and funny, and I like the fact that it's very short, not very short, but short enough to tell the story. Love the idea of this time traveler going back in time to a time that's so far back in time that he can't breathe the air because the air has to have a certain level of carbon dioxide in it because he comes from a polluted atmosphere in the future. So he needs to wear a special a bag over his head, transparent bag over his head to be able to breathe. And he brings his time machine extension cage and his flight stick with him to the past and spies what he thinks is something that looks just like a horse to him. It's white. It's got a mane. It's got four legs. It walks like a horse, as in the children's books that he's looked at. And she's accompanied by a young girl, and he negotiates with her to give him the horse. He prepares jewels for her using his equipment from the future, and she's kind of mesmerized by the different jewelry that he's able to provide to her. And ultimately by the way, even before she does that, they kind of have a race, and the horse is just whizzing along. He's flying, and the horse is going at super, super fast speeds. And the horse at one point is talking to him. And that's when you come to realize that this ain't a horse. It's actually a unicorn. So he's negotiated with the girl to bring back a unicorn with him to the future. So he tricks the horse into his extension cage, and the thing is trying to pierce him or stab him with his horn. So, but he barely escapes and transports it to the future. And they say, well, in the picture books it doesn't have a horn. What are we going to do? The Secretary General's not going to be happy with this. And they come up with the neat solution. At first they say, well, maybe we can just remove the horn. And they say, well, maybe it's safer instead let's just change the picture. So they go in and they add a horn to the picture in the books and present the unicorn to the Secretary General that way. And the story ends on another joke, which is that the Secretary General finds they describe him as being 28 years old with the mind of a 6-year-old because the royal family is inbred. But he he finds another book that has a Gila monster in it, and he says, "I want one of those." So it ends with him going back in time and bringing back one of these big lizards, except that it's really big and it breathes fire. So, but the Secretary General loves it, and it ends on that note. So this was cute. I thought it was a nice mix of science fiction and fantasy, nice and short, and I smiled all the way through it. So thumbs up.
Yeah, I thought this was all right. I mean, I'm actually a big fan of funny fantasy, like Piers Anthony and Robert Asprin and stuff like that. So, I am kind of in the target audience for this, I guess. I mean, this is one, I think it's like 12 pages long. It feels fairly slight compared to some of the other stories, but it is, it is funny. I mean, actually, the thing I liked best about this was more of the hard science fiction stuff about just the idea of this character from a post-apocalyptic future visiting medieval England, and how he, his sort of wildly off base perceptions of what he's looking at. So for example, he sees some what are clearly like medieval cottages with thatched roofs, and thinks like, oh, this must be some sort of burrows for giant insects or something. He just has no idea about his human history at all. And the detail about the air being too clean for him, I liked. It was reminds me, I don't know if you ever saw, there was a movie called Millennium where it's about time travelers coming back to rescue people off of airplanes that they know are going to crash.
Oh yeah, I've never seen it, but I remember it when it came out.
Yeah, but one of the details in that is that the time travelers from the future are just constantly chain smoking cigarettes because they come from a time where the air is so polluted that it's just too much of a shock to their system if they're breathing air that's too clean. So
that's funny. That's a nice touch.
But yeah, and so apparently Larry Niven did write more stories in this sequence. They were collected into a book called Rainbow Mars, all these Svets stories. I don't remember reading any of them. I probably won't remember reading this one in a couple of years, but yeah, it was perfectly enjoyable to read, as I was reading it.
Here's a sentence I pointed out that I wanted to read, which is when they bring the unicorn back to the future and they're analyzing it, and the scientist says, we found over 50 unknown varieties of bacteria in the beast's bloodstream, yet it hardly looked sick. It looked healthy as it must have tremendous stamina. That was pretty funny.
Yeah. So yeah, fun story. Not necessarily one I'm recommending you have to go out and read, but I enjoyed it just fine.
It's good for what it was, which is just a light, fun read. Yes.
Mm. Okay. Next story is The Hole Man. This is Hole, Hole. So in this story, there's a group of astronauts on Mars, and they have found an abandoned alien base, which is powered by some strange reactor that they don't understand. And so there's a scientist among their group named Lear, and he develops the theory that this strange alien reactor is powered by a quantum black hole, so like a very small black hole. And some of the other astronauts don't believe him. They think that this is far-fetched, and sort of conflict ensues. So, David, what'd you think of The Hole Man?
Not a favorite of mine. I think Niven was just excited about the concept of microscopic black holes, and he wanted to write a story about them. So he created a very cool setting, an alien base that's discovered on Mars. So these human astronauts are there exploring that base, which is, again, I said it's a cool concept. And there's some disagreement between two of the astronauts about one of them thinks that it's powered by a microscopic black hole. The other one is mocking him, saying it can't exist. And then there's an accident. They turn off one of the protective fields, and the microscopic black hole kind of cuts through one of the astronauts and kills him. And they were wondering whether the person murdered him on purpose, since they didn't get along. I think it's pretty clear that he murdered him. Yeah, but it was not much to it. I thought it was, if you're going to give us stock characters, you better ramp up the plot. And this was a pretty simple plot, I thought. But I do give it points for the setting. I did like the setting on Mars and that alien base. So I'd say it was just okay, not really a favorite of mine.
Yeah, I agree that the characters are very cartoonish. You have this kind of, absent-minded professor versus this kind of jock, bully astronaut guy. Yeah, very, very two-dimensional. And so Niven, in an author's note, he says that how the story came about is that he was visiting Robert Forward, who was a fellow science fiction author who was also a very sort of high level scientist. I think he worked for an aerospace company or something, and he had a lot of patents and was known for writing really hard SF novels. So anyway, so Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle go and interview Robert Forward. And Robert Forward tells them about this concept of quantum black holes, which was kind of new cutting-edge science at the time. And they're driving home, and Niven says to Pournelle, I'm going to beat Robert Forward into print. I'm going to write a quantum black hole story before he does. And he did. And it was this story, and it won a Hugo Award. And in his author's note, Niven more or less, to my reading, apologizes for winning a Hugo Award with this story. He says, usually when I win a Hugo Award, it's not a surprise, but I wasn't necessarily expecting to win one for this story. It's really just a crime story made distinctive only because of this unusual murder weapon, basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm kind of with him on that one. It was nothing special.
Yeah, it was okay, and I wish that the plot was a little bit more complicated. At the end, they decide that even if he murdered him, they'd never be able to prove it because you'd have to explain the concept of a microscopic black hole to jurors, and also explain the idea that he knew that it was in there and knew that if they turned the field off, it would cut him in half or whatever. So ultimately, they decide to just let the whole thing drop. Although I think you're right. I think he probably did it on purpose, but so it was certainly not a Hugo worthy, and not even a favorite of mine in this collection of old stories we've read so far.
Yeah, I guess I did kind of like the idea that he could never be convicted of murder because jurors would just not understand what was going on at all. My dad's a physicist, and so I very often witnessed him trying to explain his work to non-physicists, and they just get hopelessly baffled 2 seconds into the conversation. So I could definitely see that. But
when I worked as an attorney, we often defended complicated securities cases, and oftentimes one of the best arguments we made was that a jury would never be able to understand any of this, which is true a lot of the times. So,
yeah, but so I mean, this could have used, as you say, a more complicated plot, or some more complex, well-drawn characters. I mean, preferably both, but I think it definitely needed one or the other. I mean, I could maybe stand the plot as it exists if the characters had a little bit more interesting things going on, but but as it is, it was sort of underwhelming to me.
I agree with that.
Okay, so last story on our list here, Night on Mispec, Moor. So in this story, there are these sort of like corporations who wage wars according to like agreed upon rules. So in this case, they've agreed that their armies are going to fight with swords. And then they have also like cameras recording the action that I gather is sort of like a pay-per-view thing where they help defray the costs of their corporate wars by charging the audience to watch the action. So that's kind of the setup. And then, so the main character is one of these mercenaries, and he flees from battle only to find himself on this moor at night, surrounded by essentially zombies, and he has to survive. So, David, what'd you think of Night on Mispec Moor?
I thought it was, short and sweet, cross-genre sci-fi horror. Niven pulled it off much better in our last podcast when we talked about Becalmed in Hell. That one was truly horrific. This one it's basically, a soldier versus a horde of zombies. He's positioned on top of a boulder, and that has a crack in it, and as the opposing soldiers climb up through the crack, he's able to kind of shoot them down or cut them down with his sword. And but as they come back to life as zombies. Luckily, he carries with him a medicine that's able to cure him. So whenever he's injured, they take this serum that they call it the Spectrum Cure, which is sort of a healing serum that helps heal their injuries super fast. So he's been using that on himself, and by the end, he decides to use it on the attacking corpses and finds that it's effective in curing them of their zombiedom. They kind of turn from zombies into corpses, was my reading. It was the horror of it is just the fact that he's trapped, that there's this endless horde of attacking opposition forces that can't die. And also the horror of being a pawn and manipulated as part of this greater staged war. So all of that worked. I think this is one that it could have been maybe a little bit longer to give more color to what the war is about exactly. But overall, I enjoyed it. And like I said, it's always interesting when he goes cross-genre this way.
Yeah, I totally agree that Niven has done science fiction horror better in the past. Like you mentioned, Becalmed in Hell, also Bordered in Black that we talked about last time.
Oh, that's the one. That's the one I was actually thinking of.
Okay,
Bordered in Black. That one was truly terrifying.
Yeah. So if you're gonna read one of these, I would read that one over this one for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is okay. I mean, there was actually, I thought the most interesting thing is about halfway through, he suddenly, the main character, the mercenary character, suddenly starts to wonder if actually he's in like a simulation or something. He's like, what are the odds that just by chance I would be living this amazing adventurous life? Maybe someone is just paying for the experience of being me, and besides there's no such thing as zombies anyway. And then I thought that was kind of interesting, but then it never goes anywhere, and that thread just gets dropped completely.
It jumped out at me too. I like that line very much.
Yeah. So it was just it's funny because in his author's notes, Larry Niven says basically, I set out to write a sword and sorcery horror story, and I did. And that's all he has to say about this story. And I think I don't know that there's much more to say about the story than that. I mean, that is kind of pretty much what it is.
Yeah. By the way, Mispec Moor is an anagram for the word compromise.
Is that intentional, or how did you come?
I googled Mispec Moor, and I saw somebody mention that. So
okay, well, it's interesting.
It uses all the letters. Compromise. Mispec Moor.
I mean, so earlier I mentioned the Jerome Branch Corbell character was clearly a reference to the fantasy writer James Branch Cabell, and so in this setting, Niven imagines that there are 5 alien planets that were discovered by huge James Branch Cabell fans who named all the planets and everything on them after elements from James Branch Cabell's novels. So apparently Mispec Moor is a setting from Cabell's novel Something About Eve. It's sort of like a haunted, misty moor. So
Cabell deserves the credit for the anagram then.
yeah. If that's intentional, I don't know. I mean, I would like to think that any fantasy and science fiction writer is going to have anything named after them hundreds of years in the future, let alone 5 whole planets and everything on them. But I think that's kind of unlikely. But I would love to be proven wrong.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that I have a whole lot more to say about this story. It was kind of like a fairly straightforward survival horror story. And that was pretty much it.
Same here. It was fun. Yeah.
Okay, so that is all of our stories. All right, so we managed to make it through all 9.
Yes.
Not run out of time. So yeah, I definitely felt like this was more of a mixed batch than last time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I am a little apprehensive about what's going to happen for the next 9 stories we're going to talk about, where we start getting into like the 80s and I think even 2 from the 2000s.
Yeah.
But so the stories that we'll be talking about next time are Flatlander, The Magic Goes Away, Cautionary Tales, Limits, A Teardrop Falls, The Return of William Proxmire, The Borderland of Saul, Smut Talk, and The Missing Mass. I don't remember. I think I vaguely remember The Borderland of Saul, if I'm thinking of the right story, but I'm not even sure. Otherwise, I don't remember reading any of these ones. I mean, The Magic Goes Away, I would imagine, is a sequel to the one we read last time about, it's set in that Magic Goes Away. Oh, Not Long Before the End, it was called.
Right.
So I really liked that one, so maybe I'll really like this one. But
Flatlander sounds familiar to me. I'll see when I reread it whether it's something I've read before.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree with you. Definitely a mixed bag this time around. I loved Inconstant Moon and Rammer, and I did not like at all Cloaks of Anarchy and Flash Crowd. Fourth Profession, Flight of the Horse, Night on Mispec Moor were just fun. So out of these 9 stories, I'd recommend 5 of them. And the first 9 stories, I think we both recommended 8 of them. So overall, it's worth reading. I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I recommend Inconstant Moon. I also really like The Defenseless Dead, although with a caveat, I definitely recommend reading Death by Ecstasy first. I guess I had to work that in one more time.
Yeah.
I mean, those ones are sort of the ones I would really give a strong recommendation to. But in pretty much all these stories, there's something interesting. There's some interesting idea or really sophisticated exploration of some science fiction concept or something. So I wouldn't say any of them are like a total waste or anything. But definitely, in this batch, Niven does not always succeed in marrying the cool science fiction ideas to a really engaging storyline.
That's right. Yeah, I agree with that. So, but once we're done with all of these, Dave, we should rank our top 5 out of the 27 stories.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely do that. So keep an eye out, everyone, for our 3rd and final installments of The Best of Larry Niven, where we will be reviewing those final 9 stories, and then, as David says, we'll be giving our rankings for the entire book overall. So that should be fun. So keep an eye out for that. David, any final thoughts before we wrap this up?
No, it was a lot of fun.
All right, cool. So we're going to wrap things up there. So again, we've been speaking with Mercurio D. Rivera about the book, The Best of Larry Niven. So David, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our interview. So big thanks again to Mercurio D. Rivera for joining us on the show. Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please support us on Patreon over at patreon.com/geeks or via PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.